Thank you for joining us. Just going to dive right in about the NYSCA REDC opportunities that are available for round 9 this year. We have, just as a little background, we have one capital fund available, and there are 3 programs for the initiatives portion of the funding. We've made significant changes to the initiative side of things, so please listen carefully. I encourage everyone to read the guidelines a few times. It's very dense, but all of the information that you need is pretty much in there. So I'll begin. So just a little bit about NYSCA. In FY19, they distributed about $51 million in local assistance. Approximately 2,900 direct grants and re-grants were made, reaching all the 62 counties. There are competitive grants across 15 programs, which are listed on the slide. Before you decide to apply to REDC, please be sure to review your region's strategic plan. Your regional council accounts for 20 points of your application, so having a relationship with them and making sure that they get to know your project properly will give you the best chance at a good score with them. It can make or break an application. I've definitely seen applications that do well in the panel room not get a high enough REDC score, so it can be problematic for later. So please just be sure to keep that in mind. You want to make sure that your project aligns with their goals and what they're looking to do this year. There are town hall meetings that you can attend. If you go to your local region's REDC website, you'll find when the next one is, and you can go get some face time with them. Applications for the REDC are available through the Consolidated Funding Application platform. While it says single entry point to apply for all REDC funding opportunities, if you are applying for an initiative grant as well as a capital fund grant for NYSCA, we encourage you to do separate applications. The questions are so different from each other. The process would be cleaner and easier from a review standpoint if you did separate applications. And I'm sure you've heard this a lot since we've been going around to the regions, but applications are due on 7/26 at 4 p.m. Another thing to note about REDC applications is that you must meet the NYSCA agency-wide requirements, which can be found at the link on the slide. You must be pre-qualified in Grants Gateway by the CFA deadline, which is 7/26 at 4 p.m. We encourage you to do it earlier rather than later. And NYSCA, just to note, if you are applying for funding, NYSCA rarely funds more than 25% of an organization's budget. Any of the applications for REDC should be for new projects only. You should not have received any previous NYSCA or REDC funding for the same project. The only exception for this is for any renewal applications in the workforce development program. And the REDC applications are exempt from NYSCA's general 2 grant limit. So here are the 4 programs being offered in round 9. You can apply to a capital fund grant as well as one of the initiatives grants. I'm going to start with the capital fund and work my way through the rest of the initiatives grants. So funding for capital improvements for this round is there's a $1.75 million available for renovations and facilities improvements. There's no new construction allowed for this round of capital funds. Grant sizes are between $49,500 and $150,000. The grant term, the project must be completed within a 3-year period from the grant start date, which would be March 1st, 2020. So like I said, funding supports renovations, modifications for environmental sustainability, accessibility, and some technology and equipment. For this funding opportunity, applicants must be an arts and culture nonprofit organization incorporated or registered to do business in New York State, match the total request amount on a 1-to-1 basis with non-state secured sources, raise at least raise at least 50% of the total project cost from non-state sources, own their space or hold a long-term lease with a minimum 10 years remaining, excluding the capital equipment request, own the facility to apply for any exterior rehabilitation projects. There are some exceptions to be made for any critical exterior safety or accessibility upgrades, and complete the project within 3 years of the contract execution. So in terms of the match, just to give you an example, if you have a $1 million project that you're requesting, $150,000 grant, you must have $150,000 raised, and you may not finance more than $500,000 through combined state funds. So no more than 50% of any entire project budget can be from state source funds, which includes the NYSCA request when you're doing your application. Here are some eligible costs. There is a very exhaustive list of eligible and ineligible applications that you can find in the guidelines. Just the most important thing to note, like I said before, funding does not support any new construction, and soft costs cannot be more than 15% of the total grant request. So NYSCA will prioritize a project that addresses one or more of the areas shown on the slide. Please be sure to address them directly in your application narrative. I'm going through this, but we're going to provide you with the recording and a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint so you can have it at hand if you're not able to join any of the regional meetings. There are also going to be handouts of this at any of the CFA workshop meetings that if you are able to attend. But basically, we're looking for projects that improve, expand, or rehabilitate existing buildings to provide access for all, address known health and safety deficiencies, address issues of building stabilization, further cultural development in rural or minority communities, reduce an organization's operating costs, demonstrate environmental stewardship and/or sustainable building practices. So now I'll move on to the initiatives grants, which you can only apply to one of the following: the New York State Arts Impact Awards, Workforce Investment, or Arts Workforce Fellowships. There's up to $5 million across all 3 programs. I'll start with New York State Arts Impact. Eligible organizations include nonprofit organizations, Native American tribes, or local units of government. This is the only grant opportunity with a 1-year term besides the workforce development renewals. Grants support the expansion of ambitious public arts projects that have proven successful at the local level. Expansion for this award means to either extend the life of a public arts project or expand its reach to another region or broader audience. There's up to $1 million available for this grant. Each grant is $100,000. The grant term is March 2020 to February 2021. Successful applications will demonstrate significant economic and community development impact that positions arts and culture and heritage at the core of local development and revitalization efforts. This, I would say, is across the board for all of the applications this year, is an inclusive approach engaging a variety of stakeholders as part of the proposed project. Applicants must also match the total request amount on a one-to-one basis, again with non-state secured sources. In-kind services are not permitted in the match. They must raise at least 50% of the total project cost from non-state sources, and in no case will a New York State Arts Impact Award fund more than 50% of the total project cost. Allocate funds towards direct expenses associated with the expansion of the production or exhibition of large-scale temporary arts or cultural activities that take place in currently underutilized locations and venues and have the potential to engage diverse audiences, attract tourists to new areas, and drive economic development across New York State. So again, I won't read out this whole slide, but it'll be available online after the webinar, and it'll be available with the recording. But these are the general goals of what we are looking for in successful applications for the Arts Impact Award. I will move on to eligible costs. These are the types of things that the fund will support. There's also the types of projects that would be eligible for this particular award. It is a new program area, so if you have any very specific questions about what would qualify for this program area, please be sure to email us at our NYSCA REDC email address, which I will give to you at the end of the presentation. So here's what we're looking for in any of these applications: livability, quality of life, expanded tourism to previously underutilized areas, new and increased revenue for local businesses, job growth, especially in the area of artist compensation, and opportunities for local or regional artists to create, market, or make a living from their art. I'll now move on to workforce development. Eligible organizations for any of the workforce development opportunities are nonprofit organizations with an arts and culture mission, incorporated in or registered to do business in New York State. So the goals for this program, we're looking for proposals that will expand and diversify the arts and cultural workforce, develop and nurture a diverse next generation of arts and culture practitioners, create jobs in the arts and culture sector that will provide new opportunities for workers and communities across the state, use new and expanded positions to increase the capacity, quality, and impact and efficiency of organizations, their programs, and their operations. I'm not going to read the whole statement, but one of the major changes that we made for the workforce development program is making sure that there is a larger focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any proposals that don't include any statements about DEI or does not address any DEI issues will not be competitive in this round. The most important thing to note is that diversity and underrepresentation are broad terms, and you should explicitly define them as they apply to your organization and community in your application narrative, and make sure you speak to the priorities listed in the guidelines in your application. So the first one I'll go over is the workforce investment opportunity. Again, total funding for all three initiatives programs is $5 million. The purpose of the program is to create opportunities for underrepresented communities in the arts workforce. The grants are for newly created full or part-time positions or the expansion of part-time positions to full-time or resident artist positions. Grants for new positions, this is the other big change that we made for this program actually, is that we're offering renewal opportunities for round 8 grantees. For the new positions, grant sizes are from $37,500 to $112,500, plus up to $10,000 for resident artist projects. So the maximum amount that you can request is $122,500 if you are applying for a resident artist position. The grant term is March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2022. We've now made all of the workforce investment new grants as 2-year contracts versus how it was in the past as 1 year. There's a 50% matching requirement of the grant amount. Again, this does not include in-kind services, and they must be non-state and secured. The organizational budget size for workforce investment grants is up to $3 million. The exception to this rule is for resident artist positions. For renewal grants for round 8 grantees, the grant size is from $12,500 to $37,500, again, plus up to $10,000 for the resident artist project. The grant term is from March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2021. The matching requirement for this grant is 150% of the grant amount. So this means if you apply for a $20,000 grant, you must have $30,000 match secured to be eligible. So the 2 focus areas for workforce investment opportunities are general full-time or part-time positions or resident artist positions. In terms of eligible costs, I'm going to just more talk about the ineligible costs. This is a grant that supports only 1 single position. Ineligible costs are payroll taxes, fringe benefits, overhead costs, contracted employees, or seasonal staff. So successful applications will demonstrate a strategic need for the position, a commitment to recruiting and hiring candidates from historically underrepresented communities, and the capacity to sustain the position beyond the end of the grant period. I'm going to move on to Arts Workforce Fellowship. Again, up to $5 million available for all of the NYSCA REDC initiatives. The workforce development grants are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within the arts workforce. The purpose of the fellowship program is to usher and support emerging arts professionals from historically underrepresented communities. So here's information about the grants available. Again, we're providing this also as a renewal opportunity for anyone that received grants in round 7 and 8. And just a note about the workforce investment previous grantees, if you have a workforce investment grant from round 7 or earlier, you are more than welcome to apply for one of the new 2-year grants for either a new position or to expand a part-time position to full-time from something that was previously funded through workforce investment. But anyway, back to Arts Workforce Fellowship. The grant sizes are $45,000 to $112,500. We are also including, you can request up to $120,000. Of that $120,000, $7,500 can be used for organizational equity work. This money is really meant to help your organization become ready to welcome in a diverse group of fellowship applicants or fellowship participants, making sure that you're prepared for their needs and that you're also able to incorporate them into your organizational culture smoothly. The grant term for this is, for the new grants, are March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2022. Again, same matching requirement, 50% of the grant amount, which does not include in-kind services, and the match must be from non-state secured sources. For the renewal grants, again, it's 150% match of the grant amount. The grant period is March 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2021. Does include the $7,500, so you can add on $7,500 for organizational equity work to the grant size. The grant size is $15,000 to $37,500. So for this program, applicants must propose a detailed curriculum, including a dedicated training component that will be applied consistently over the course of the program, appoint a dedicated staff coordinator, set a maximum time commitment of 40 hours per week for fellows, compensate participants competitively. And for this, I will say, if you are not paying your fellows at New York State's minimum wage rate of $15 per hour, the application will be deemed ineligible. And also agree to participate in convenings for cohort learning and evaluation if the grant is awarded. So the grant funds requested should be used to support at least 2 fellows per cohort, and at least 30% of the grant funds should be used to compensate the fellows. In line with the DEI focus, paper fellows should at least meet the New York State minimum wage requirements. Again, successful applications will demonstrate a balance between professional development and training and mentorship, commitment to recruiting, hiring, and welcoming candidates from historically underrepresented communities, and the capacity to sustain the program beyond the end of the grant period. So if you look at the guidelines, there's very detailed information about how scoring happens in the NYSCA panel room, how we do our eligibility review, and also how REDC, the regional council for the program. So you can definitely take a closer look at that. But just note that we don't score the entire application. We only score 80% of the application. The other 20% comes from the regional council. So I strongly encourage everyone to make sure that they are in contact with their local regional councils to make sure that their project priorities align with the council's priorities. Here are some tips to complete your application. I'm just going to point out some ones that we thought were important to pay attention to. The big one is, do not assume that everyone who will read your application is familiar with your organization or your work. Provide the right amount of context in your application, as our panelists come from different backgrounds and may not be familiar with your work or your region. Try to submit separate applications if you decide to apply to both the Capital Fund and one of the initiatives programs. Double check your budget and your expense allocations. Budgets should meet the minimum and maximum threshold, show the required match effectively, and add up to the grant amount requested. And while this is optional, we encourage you to provide letters of support for your project program. This gave the panelists better context when they are scoring the application. And most importantly, please adhere to the application deadline. Our system really gets overloaded on July 26th with everyone trying to submit. So I encourage you to submit early just to make sure everything is okay. Once you submit, we can't take the application back or reopen it for you. It's all final, so whatever you've given is what we will review as staff and panel. Please try to do everything early. It's better for you. At the end of the day, if something happens, if there's any technical glitch and you're right up against the deadline and you're unable to submit your application for whatever reason, we can't make any exceptions to that rule because it kind of taints the neutrality of the process. So here's where you can reach us. For any program-related or grant-related questions, you can email us at NYSCA.REDC@arts.ny.gov. It would be helpful if you could please submit questions by no later than July 14th, 2019. We get a lot of inquiries. We had almost 300 applications last year, so we want to be able to be as responsive as possible, but that becomes difficult as the CFA deadline approaches. If you have any issues with the CFA, please email cfa-tech@ny.gov. Any Grants Gateway issues, you should email grantsgateway@its.ny.gov. And any pre-qualification questions, you can email us at help@arts.ny.gov. So now I'm going to switch over from the share screen and try to answer any questions that were entered into the chat. Or just keep it on the share screen and see if we can do that. So there's a question about, will the PowerPoint be distributed afterwards? I'm going to provide everyone with a PDF version of the PowerPoint that you can hold on to. They're also handouts are being distributed at any of the CFA workshops coming up, so you can have access to it. So there's a question about, at which date does the matching requirement need to be secured? For the Arts Impact and for the mid-sized capital fund, they should be secured at hand. The reasoning for the mid-sized capital fund is that we want shovel-ready projects that are ready to go as soon as the funding is received. So you should be able to show a secure commitment or show what your fundraising plan is and the viability of it at the time of your application. Your application is just always more competitive if you can show how you're going to secure the match, or if you're going to have the match, how you're going to get it. If you can get letters of support showing that, if you're able to get it from a one source funding option, or if you decide that you're going to use general operating funds, whatever it is, it's helpful for us. It just makes for a more competitive application. I don't think we aren't requiring it for the workforce development grants that way, but the more competitive applications will have the money at hand. So the next question. And what elements, okay, so the next question is, can you talk a bit more about the curriculum and what elements should be included? We took a really long, hard look at the previous workforce readiness program and how it was being administered. And while I'm sure all of our previous grantees appreciated the awards that they received for those opportunities, we found that many of them were probably a little bit ill-prepared to have in interns, fellows, apprentices, however you'd like to define what that means to your organization. We called it fellowships because we ended up keeping the name fellowships because we decided that any of the programming or any of the curriculum for these fellows should be very holistic. They should be creating a career pathway for them. It shouldn't be just professional development, as in just working in an office setting or working in an organizational setting. They should also be exposed to networking opportunities, any other educational learning opportunities that you can provide them with that would just better help them for whatever their next step is in their career. That was one of the big feedback points we got last year from our panelists, is that you could tell when organizations were being thoughtful about how they wanted to support their fellows and how they wanted to see them succeed and what they were going to do to help them succeed. You want to make sure that they don't get lost in the system and have some sort of backup plan for that, so they're not just kind of doing non-focused, aimless work. Having a variety of work to do is wonderful. It's a great learning opportunity, but it should all be very intentional in terms of how what kind of curriculum you develop for them for the time that they're with you. So for workforce fellowships, can you apply to expand an existing fellowship, apprenticeship program, or does the program need to be entirely new? No, the program does not need to be entirely new. You can apply for it, just make sure that you're addressing all of the program goals and all of the DEI requirements that we're putting in this time around. If you have not, it's also best to know if you have not received a workforce fellowship in the past, it's totally fine if it's an old program that you already have that's existing. It shows us that you already have tested it out, you know what works and what does not work, and you can also show us how you plan on improving it as the time goes. Okay, and the next question, do fellows need to be the same throughout, sorry, 1 second, I'm having problems reading the question. Do fellows need to be the same throughout the grant term, i.e. could we cycle through a new group of fellows mid-grant? Yes, you don't have to stick with the same group of fellows. If you would like to have 2 cohorts versus 1 cohort, that is perfectly fine. So it is up to you and how you design it. You just have to give us all of the details as to why you would design it that way. Hi, you mentioned the CFA workshop meeting. Where would the dates for those be found? If you look up the REDC, if you go to the REDC website and go to events, they usually list where all of the workshops are going to be happening. I don't have the list in front of me right now, but if you'd like, you can email NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov and we'll provide you a link to that site. They're also this year requiring RSVPs for each CFA workshop meeting. So you could find the one for your region and RSVP to it. There's a few left in this month. There will be none that are held in July. I think there are 2 meetings per region for the 2-month period. So we're coming up to the end of that. Regarding workforce investment, my organization has 2 leadership roles which have been performed largely on a volunteer basis, but occasionally paid by a nominal contractor 1099 fees. Would the expansion of this position to a salaried part-time position qualify as a new part-time position? If not, this would only be considered if it were a part-time to full-time expansion. Is there a minimum annual salary for a full-time position? That is a very complex question, Tyler. If you could please just copy and paste that question to the NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov, because I can get you a more full answer than I can answer in this format. So please just be sure to email. We'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. I also just need to make sure with our general counsel that some of this is okay. It is definitely okay to go from a volunteer basis to becoming a salaried employee. I just have to understand if they're paid contractor fees, if that's allowed. I think it is allowed. I think it should be fine, since even a contractor can go from part-time to being a salaried position, but I just need to double check. So if you could, please kindly email that to us at NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov. So the next question, for a presenting organization, could they apply for Arts Impact if it's not one work they do, but a series from other organizations? I think I need a little bit more information or clarification before I can answer that. So Katie Berry, if you could also please just email your question to NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov with a little bit more detail. That would be helpful. Then I can give you a more pointed answer. And we'd like to apply for workforce. Okay, so we asked for a general operating support. We asked for a general operating support from NYSCA in 2020. We would like to apply for workforce investment funds to support a new position that was not listed in the budget for our 2020 NYSCA Gen Ops proposal. Are we eligible to receive REDC funding for this new position? Yes, you are eligible as long as the funds don't cross over to the new position. You are absolutely eligible to apply for a new position. Next question, are renewal grants exempt from the one NYSCA REDC limit, application limit? No, you can only apply to one of the initiatives programs. So if it's for renewal grant, that's the only grant that you can apply to out of the 3 initiatives programs. Also, if you're eligible for renewal, you can't apply for any of the new grant opportunities with the 2 years. We tried to make it as equitable as possible to give people an opportunity to extend the time that they have if they're currently receiving a grant in either of those workforce development categories, and that was the best that we could do. So it's either renewal, or if you're eligible for renewal, or application in a program category that you have not already received funding for. So there's a question about how do you withdraw a current NYSCA capital grant application to be able to submit the NYSCA REDC grant. Thank you. You should go onto our website and look up Christine Leahy. She is the person that you would let her know about wanting to withdraw your NYSCA grant application. If you can't find the information, just email us at nysca.redc@arts.ny.gov and we'll provide you with your contact information. Oh, our renewal grant, no guys, I did that one, yeah. Sorry, there's a lot of questions. This is great, guys. We received workforce investment 5 years ago. We'd like to apply again for a new development position. Are we eligible to apply for these funds again? Again, yes, you can apply for a new 2-year position as long as it's a new it sounds like it's a new development position that hasn't already been funded by REDC. You are absolutely allowed to apply. We'd like to offer artist residencies for 1 year. We are planning on providing a very competitive artistic fee and provide benefits. Can we apply for artistic residencies that are only 1 year? So the short answer to this is yes, but it is still a 2-year grant. So you would have to account for the 2nd year of the grant. Would you be working with a new artist? Why would you be ending the grant after 1 year with that artist? We understand that sometimes artists don't want to stay in one place for too long if there are other opportunities for them to grow. Yeah, but you can have one artist for 1 year and another artist for another year, so 2 artists in the same grant term. We are not offering 1-year grants for this program area, but you are more than welcome to apply with 2 artists. It is a harder application to write because we expect that you have the artists that you want to work with already planned out and that there's buy-in from both parties in the work that you're willing to do together, but it is definitely possible. So the next question is, my organization received a REDC workforce grant in the past. When would we be eligible to apply for that grant again? Again, if you got a workforce, we're only offering renewal opportunities to round 8 grantees. It just depends on which workforce grant you're talking about. If you'd like to give me some more detail, you can email us at the nysca.redc@arts.ny.gov email address, and I just need a little bit more detail to answer your question properly. Next question, are there any consistent mistakes or issues you find that occurs with these applications? The ones that I mentioned at the end about budgets adding up, making sure that your allocations are all correct. So when we say we don't want more than 50% from state funds, which include NYSCA sources, we actually go through the budgets and make sure that there's no more than 50% of total project costs that are coming from state sources. At that time, we deem those applications ineligible. So make sure that you're hitting all your percentages correctly, that you're looking at the correct minimum and maximum thresholds for each grant, and that you're actually putting that down. Budget is a huge one. And also just making sure that the context of what your organization does and how it aligns with the REDC priorities, as well as how it aligns with the program priorities, make sure that's very clear in the application. The best applications will have all of that information woven in nicely, but some applications which had potential to be great just didn't have the right narrative around it or weren't very clear about that. If you have any budget issues, if there are any budget discrepancies, it's better to be transparent than not. We look at operational organizational budget information, and if it looks weird or it looks funky or there's something that's just not right about it, it does make it a little bit difficult to make the case as to why an application should move forward. So if you do have any sort of anomalies in your financial information, just be clear about what why those anomalies are there, or what the reason is, and how what your plan is to fix it, or if it just looks worse than it actually is. Just explain all of that. We'd rather you be more transparent than not. I think those are the major ones, I would say. But if you look at the guidelines, the tips are very helpful. We tried to make sure that there were application tips that you can find very easily in the guidelines. The next question, for the capital fund, should the local regional council be a formal partner on the grant application, or is their support participation informal? Their support or participation is informal. This is the side of it where it's about your relationship building with them, but they don't have to be a formal partner on the grant application. There's one question that doesn't seem to be complete, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Is there any time for a program officer to give feedback on an application prior to submission? Yes. When you received your emails about whether or not your application was accepted or approved, we provided you with the NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov email address. You're more than welcome to call us for past applications, but not, so this is for past applications. If you want to get any feedback for past applications, we're happy to give you feedback. For any current applications that you're planning to put in, we are actually not allowed to give feedback that way on anything substantive. We can answer technical questions, we can answer eligibility questions. If it's a complex project that you feel like you're not sure if it's going to fit in, you can explain it to us and we can give you our interpretation of the guidelines as to whether or not it would work. But we can't actually tell you if, let's say you had multiple projects that you could apply with, we can't tell you which one is better than the other. You sort of have to make that determination on your own. It taints the neutrality of the process, again, if we put in our 2 cents. So the next question for the capital, scroll down. For the capital campaign grant, how far along does the project need to be? For example, in the design stage, ready to start work, etc. So if you take a look at the guidelines, we actually are not supporting any design work for this round. It's a small fund. We want to be able to use it effectively, and funding design work last year we found it was very complicated. So it should be at the shovel-ready phase. It should be ready to go. You should be able to complete it within 3 years that we provide you with to do the project. But it should really be just ready to go, which includes not just being ready to do it, but also having the funding in place and being able to show that you'd be able to complete it within the time frame. Can an organization that's not based in New York be eligible for capital funding? All organizations must be registered to do business in New York State. And all of the projects really should be in New York State. So it doesn't really, it's a state program, it's state funding. So unfortunately, I don't think organizations that are not based in New York are eligible. If it is an organization that has a branch in New York and is registered to do business in New York as well, then that might be a possibility. But it is harder to make that case, I think, in the grander scheme of competitive applications. The next question, if the REDC grant period does not line up perfectly with our production calendar, could we apply to fund a portion of a fellowship program? Could the funding kick in midstream? So, you are more than welcome to start a program earlier than the grant period. REDC funds would only cover whatever you have, whatever is expended during the grant period, which is after March 1st, 2020 through February 2022. So if you can cover that time that REDC isn't covering it with other funds, but generally speaking, even if it doesn't line up perfectly, you just have to show how it's going to be paid for and the continuity of the program over the 2 years. You can also, for most of these grants, you can get up to a 6-month extension. So if you need more time to spend down the money, that is totally fine too. For the workforce fellowships, do the dates mean that funded fellowships could not begin until after March 1st, 2020? I think I just answered that. No, that does not mean that you have to wait until March 1st, 2020, but it really should be within the fiscal year. That kind of shows us that, okay, the intent is to get funding for the time period you're allotted with the fellowship funds, but it shouldn't be like significantly earlier. That's a program that's already in progress. So please clarify, is the grant award for 2 years total or for each of 2 years? And did you say that grant funds can only support one position, or can one grant support multiple positions? So for the workforce investment grants, for the new grants, the grant award is for 2 years total. For the workforce fellowship new grants, it supports at least 2 fellows for 2 years. You can have multiple cohorts within that 2-year period if you'd like of fellows, but it is only for the 2-year period. For the workforce investment, it only supports a single position. So it can, and one single salaried position, either part-time to full-time, new part-time or new full-time, whatever it is, it can only support one position. Okay, the next question. Does a resident artist position have to be a full-time employee? Based on ineligible funds, it seems like they cannot be contractual. Trying to differentiate between general and artist position things. So they can't be contractual. It doesn't have to be full-time necessarily, but they have to be part-time salaried. So there's a difference between how that works with and what fringe benefits and et cetera, taxes are paid on that. So just, I would look that up to see, but they can be part-time, they don't have to be full-time. Okay, next question. 2 questions for the Arts Impact Program. Can any percentage be for staff costs? And I have the same question as Tyler, so I can email and get it on that reply. Okay, for the Arts Impact Program, let me just take a look. It's direct costs associated with it, so if there is one direct staff member, I believe that it should be okay. I would take a look at the guidelines to make sure. It's very exhaustive in terms of what we consider eligible and ineligible costs. But I believe that's okay. I'm just taking a look at the guidelines as I talk to you guys. And then artist fees, Yes. So it is eligible. Staff time dedicated to executing the project is an eligible cost. So the next question, are these requirements in coordination and overlap with Market New York Tourism Grant Program given a particular application that focuses on the arts? I think I'm not super clear on that. So Eric Smith, if you can please email me a little bit more detail about that. You can apply for the same project through Art Market New York as well as through NYSCA if both programs align with that project. But if you just want to send me a little bit more information so I have a clearer picture of what you're asking, that would be helpful. Okay, so and quickly, what was the REDC program other than the Capital, Arts Impact, and Workforce? So the 4 programs that are available are the Mid-Capital, Mid-Size Capital Fund, the New York State Arts Impact Awards, and within Workforce Development, under the umbrella of Workforce Development, you have the Arts Workforce Fellowship, as well as Workforce Investment. Next question, regarding Workforce Investment Program, are there any restrictions regarding types of positions, for instance, janitorial receptionist? No, there are no restrictions on that. They should, whatever the position is, should align with the program goals, and you need to make the case as to why that position is important for the program goals. But it's totally fine if you wanted to apply for a janitorial position or a receptionist position. The next question, are high school students eligible to be fellows in the Arts Workforce Fellowship Program? Yes, this is a yes but question. So yes, they are eligible, but the program should be sort of tailored to students or post-education students that have enough time to put towards a fellowship. It's not really an internship style where you only put in maybe like 5 to 10 hours a week. High school students generally have pretty full schedule, so making the time to do something like this fellowship might be difficult. You are eligible to apply, but the application probably would not be as competitive in comparison to others who would be doing more post-high school, post-college fellowship programs. So for Annie, it would be helpful if you could, Annie, I think I actually have your question in the REDC box already to create a part-time position for an existing fellow. I'm just waiting for an answer from our general counsel to make sure that I'm interpreting the guidelines correctly and that I can give you the correct answer. So don't worry, I did not forget about you. I will definitely get back to you shortly once I get an answer from her. So the next question, we have applied for base aid from NYSCA for 2020. Our budget included the position which was supported by round 8 workforce development funds. Can we apply for a renewal from REDC workforce development? I'm going to actually have to check on that, Ezra. This is from Ezra Delaney. If you can, please send me that request to the NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov. The overlap makes it a bit complicated in terms of your current 2020 application. It can't actually be used for the match. I know that part, but I have to see if this is actually allowed. So please just be sure to email me at NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov. So the next question, are new nonprofits, no previous grant history, eligible to apply for REDC? Can matching funding, the other 50%, include projected revenue based on prior year revenue from tickets sold, participant fees, donations, etc.? Yes, you're welcome to apply, but it's hard to be competitive amongst the organizations that will be applying. If you don't have too many years under your belt, or you're a very brand new 501c3 who's still fundraising or trying to figure out a fundraising strategy, it can be hard to make the case in this application. The matching portion can be challenging for a lot of organizations to make sure that you're actually able to find the money to support the project that you're applying for. So you'd really, really, really have to make a clear case as to how you would make that happen. You're more than welcome to apply, but for the most part, I would say it's a little bit difficult to be competitive amongst the seasoned organizations. Next question is, what components are required for the capital campaign grant application? For instance, an approved project budget, design for space, board and/or executive approval, etc. If you go to the guidelines and if you go to the CFA application platform, this is more clear there. I don't have that answer readily in front of me. We do need to know that everything is as fully baked as possible and pretty much ready to go. So whatever you would need to show for that to happen, for a project to be complete quickly, that's what we would want to see. The more information you give us, the better. The more clear, detailed information you give us about where you are at in the process, a clear timeline, design specs, quotes, whatever it is, if we have it, it is a much stronger application. Board and executive approval is a little bit, we haven't put a focus on that in the past, but it's also just helpful to have. And any partnerships and support letters that you have doing any of the capital work that you're doing, that's also helpful to show us so that we see that there's buy-in from other communities that you're involved with. So the next question, my organization is going through a leadership transition. Would this affect our application negatively if none of the positions we are proposing would report to the ED? Leadership transitions are hard. It is hard to make the case as to how the grant funds would be used effectively and responsibly when there isn't someone at the helm. You are more than welcome to apply, but it's a little bit uncertain as to how competitive the application would be. You would have to probably give a good outlook and plan for who is taken over while you're going through the leadership transition, what the plan is to replace that person, and also, why you're applying for a different position when you don't have a leader in place where you had one previously. So you just have to make the case for it, but it's a little bit difficult, I think, amongst the types of applications that we get. The next question, can we put in an application for both workforce investment as well as workforce development application? No, you cannot. You can only apply, you can only apply to either workforce investment or workforce fellowships. You cannot, or our impact awards. You cannot apply to all three or two of three. You can only apply to one. For the workforce fellowship, can you talk about the curriculum a bit more? The guidelines are really clear about this, so please be sure to go to the workforce fellowship section of the guidelines. It's hard to say what to put in the curriculum. It's really based on your organizational culture, on your organization's work, and how you plan on sort of think about it as uplifting and ushering in emerging new arts workforce participants so that they want to stay in the field and that they feel like they have room to grow or move from your organization in the right way. So, you're looking at all aspects of how to support them beyond just giving them the work experience that they need. And it should just be thoughtful and honest of what you're capable of doing, what you hope to accomplish, having some clear goals around what you hope to accomplish with each of them, how you plan on checking in with them, making sure you're evaluating each other through the whole process. I think those are really like key things to look at when you're developing a curriculum for this kind of a program. Okay, apologies if you already replied to this question. I understand we can't apply if we already have a multi-year contract with NYSCA. So I don't think that's true. You can apply, it just can't be for the same project that's already being funded by NYSCA. So it has to be completely new. It can't already be funded through general operating support or any other project support that NYSCA is providing you with. It is exempt from the 2 grant limit that NYSCA has, so you are welcome to apply. If we've applied for a 2020 NYSCA grant for a general event program, can we apply to workforce investment to support a position that was mentioned in the grant? It's a little bit tough. You would have to make sure, if you did receive the general grant, you would have to make sure that none of the NYSCA funds for the 2020 general grant would overlap with the REDC funds if you were to receive it. You would have to be clear about that and make sure that you let the appropriate NYSCA staff member know that you are, planning to apply to REDC funds for that specific position, and that it will not be included in the general grant funds for the application you just submitted, and where that other allocation of that money would go towards if it didn't go towards that position. I'm not sure. I think, Jenny, you have to just let me email us, because I'm not exactly sure what you mean. As long as you're not, I'm just going to answer this again, as long as you're not overlapping in terms of like NYSCA funds that are supporting, it can only be like basically one NYSCA program can only support either workforce investment or fellowship. So you can't have, for either of those, you can only have NYSCA REDC funds plus your match funds, but you can't have NYSCA general funds plus NYSCA REDC funds for either workforce investment or the fellowship. They can't overlap. So I hope that answers your question. If not, just send me some more details and information to the NYSCA.redc@arts.ny.gov. Regarding a question regarding matching workforce development requirements, can you explain how the math works if the REDC grant does not cover fringe benefits? For example, if the project cost is $60K including fringe benefits, or $50K excluding fringe benefits, can we apply for $30K knowing that our match would support the fringe benefits, or can be only applied for $25K? So you can use the match for fringe benefits. That's the purpose of having that kind of a match. It's totally fine. The NYSCA funds that you request, whatever that total grant amount is split over 2 years. So you'll have that 50% match of the grant funds you're requesting is covered for the 2 years. So you would have to make that your grant match or your grant request accordingly. But match funds can cover fringe benefits. It's just that the NYSCA portion can only be for the salary of that one position. So one question, what are the chances of a New York City organization being funded versus an upstate New York application? We try to make sure that there's geographic diversity as much as possible when we're doing the process. I think we did a fairly good job last year. I've been at NYSCA for about a year now, so I did this process once, and I think we got a pretty good coverage considering the percentage of organizations that are in New York City versus other regions. And we did our best to cover all the regions that we could. We did our best to spread the money as far as we could. In some cases, giving partial funding versus full funding requests for the larger capital grants that we made last year. But I think we do pay attention to geographic diversity and making sure that our lists are never New York City heavy necessarily, and making sure that we are getting a good balance and representation across the state. As I said earlier in the presentation, NYSCA's covered all 62 regions through direct grants and re-grants, which I think is a feat in itself, considering how small the staff is actually here and how many grants they manage. So we do our best. As long as the application is competitive enough, it will rise to the top, and we also guide our panelists through the process and make sure that they're paying attention to all of those factors when they're scoring the applications. So another question, workforce investment, new grant. Would an application to support expanding an existing position be competitive if the existing staff in the position were not from an underrepresented group? Yes, it would be. You'd have to make the case as to why you're expanding it and why it's important to you. I would say the DEI focus that we've put in place is really just, we want to make sure that everyone that we are considering is looking at those issues within their organization. Once you go through the CFA application questions, you'll see there are more tailored questions to address this for each program area. It is extremely important for the Arts Workforce Fellowship Program, but also equally important for workforce investment. You should also note that, like I said before, that diversity is very different from region to region, and we understand that. We're not looking for, there's no prescriptive definition of that. You just have to explain to us why, why this candidate and why not open it to others, et cetera, and why you need to expand a part-time to full-time, why you need more time with them, and how it would benefit the organization in the long haul, how those benefits would align with the REDC, with your regional council's goals and priorities, as well as the program's goals and priorities. Is there a reimbursement process for the capital campaign, or do we need NYSCA approval to draw down on the grant? Yes, the way that the payments are made, and this is different depending on the grant amount, but any grants, I believe, that are under 50,000, so 49,500, or anything under 50,000, I think gets paid out at once. And I'm not sure how we're going to structure it for this year in terms of the payment, but the way that we structured it for FY19 is based on percentage of project complete. So initially, when the contract is executed, 25% of the grant funds are released to the grantee, and then there are certain benchmarks that you have to hit to get the rest of the funding. I believe the last payment is always for any of the larger grants that at 95% completion, that's when we release the rest of the funds. And the last portion is usually a pretty big chunk of the grant, almost half of it. The next question, does the 50% match apply to the $7,500 that we can apply for an EDI work for our organization? I think the answer is yes. I know that we've gone over this question in the past, so I believe that the answer is yes. It does apply to the $7,500. Also, just FYI, everyone is thinking Abby, but this is actually Sunita. I'm the interim program officer for the program, and I'm here with my colleague, Oren. I'm sorry I did not do that introduction earlier. I was very overwhelmed by the conference, the webinar software that we're using, and this is my first time doing it. So apologies for not making the introduction earlier. Next one, will the slides be available after this presentation? Yes, they will. I'm going to make sure that there's a link to a PDF version of the slides and after this, as well as a recording of the entire webinar. Next question, can the Arts Impact Grant be used to expand on an existing activity to develop into a larger initiative? If the existing activity was mentioned in our 2020 NYSCA grant, would that disqualify our REDC application? Again, same answer as before, as long as you make sure that whatever you're applying for, as long as if it was a general grant, you would just have to make sure that you're clear that there will be no overlap in using NYSCA funds if you were to receive both grants for that one project. And yes, the grant can be used to expand on an existing activity to develop into a larger initiative, but please be sure to read the guidelines carefully. We are looking for large-scale public arts projects that are really going to have really benefit from the additional, it's basically we're giving you additional money to keep an initiative going or to expand it to other regions and audiences. You have to really, really show how that project is successful and why it's successful and why you think the extra funding would be beneficial. Again, align it always with your regional council's goals as well as NYSCA's goals in that program. For the artist residency, what constitutes public engagement? Does it have to be at the core of the artist's work, or would something like talkbacks and audience workshops structured around the work count? It's a hard question to answer. I think it really just depends on where your organization is situated, what your audience is like, who you're trying to engage. Are you trying to expand that? The best applications, and this is kind of more, I think, in an opinion part of many applications and proposals that I've read over the few years that I've been working in philanthropy, the best applications really look at the community, constituents, and the organization as like equal stakeholders in whatever work they're doing. The more engagement that you have with your constituents and with your community as a whole, the better the applications are more generally. Like the work tends to be more effective, and you can show that effectiveness. It shouldn't be just something very like prescriptive and just sort of like we're doing these talkbacks. It should really be incorporated into the plan that you have with the artists themselves and the type of work that they're doing, and that should be authentic in itself. That's what reads well in those kinds of applications. For the artist residency, what constitutes, oh, I think I read that one. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. Oh, it's the same one. Does it have to be at the core of the artist's work? Okay, that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Again, if you have any questions, please email us at nysca.redc@arts.ny.gov. It's me and another colleague, Oren Shapes, that are answering those questions, so please be patient with us. We do our best to keep up with the questions. Sometimes if we're not answering you, it's not because we're not answering you, it's because we're trying to get clarity and making sure that we're giving you the right answers in terms of the interpretation of the guidelines. We have another colleague working with us who is now officially on maternity leave, so we're a little bit shorthanded. Whatever questions you do ask, please be sure to read the guidelines a few times before you ask them. We can tell pretty immediately if you have not read the guidelines, and more than likely I will just point you to the guidelines and what page number you should look at to find the answer to your question. We're happy to answer more complex questions, but just please be sure to take a careful look. We worked really hard on them this year. They're very different from what they were last year, and we really tried to make sure that everything was clear and in one place for you to go through. I know it's a long document, and I know that the NYSCA portion is like 40-something pages, but it's still worth it worth it to go through it carefully. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate everyone's questions and patience. And we'll hear from you soon, and good luck on your application. Take care.